Hey everybody, it's Joe Trippi, and welcome back to a special episode of That Trippi Show. No Alex this show, but actually there is an Alex. My special guest this week is Alex Theodoridis of UMass Amherst, who just put out one of the most fascinating polls I've seen in a while. It's not the usual head-to-head about candidates that we always tell you on the show to ignore those head-to-heads. But with America's 250th coming up, they took a look at what Americans think it means to be an American. And I think there's a lot we can all learn from this. Alex, welcome.
Great to be here with you, Joe.
I really think this is fascinating because one of the things your poll shows, about 3/4 of Americans say we have more in common than divides us. But at the same time, there's these huge partisan gaps on issues like racism and Christian nationalism. Is it basically two different realities coexisting under one national identity? Or what? I'd like you to get into the poll a little bit and some of your findings.
Yeah. So, I think what you said earlier in introducing me, I think is what we sort of aim for. We don't necessarily, want to be or see our comparative advantage being the horse race. I mean, we do that obviously because it's relevant to all sorts of other things, or just the standard stuff that other pollsters do. But we're political scientists, and I think what we bring to this is some expertise in terms of developing poll questions, getting at some of the deeper sort of meanings of things and relationships between things. And one of the things we really wanted to look deeply at is where are we heading into the 250th? And as you say, we find that's sort of the number you mentioned is sort of the hopeful number. Most people agree that the United States, that we have more that unites us than what divides us, right? Most people who are Democrats think that, Republicans think that. It's incredibly close, like, within a millimeter of mercury, they agree on that. But as you say, when you look at sort of the details and how people are examining where the country is, things like immigration, race, gender, what it means to be an American, whether this is a Christian country, all of those things, we see huge gaps. And so I think what we're seeing is that people still want to believe in the American experiment, people from both parties. And most people don't think, we asked, should the U.S. be split up into Republican areas and Democratic areas, as has been, proposed. People people like MTG talking about divorces and things like that. And most people don't agree with that. Now, I will say it's like 1 in 5. So I would guess that, if I told somebody in the 1950s that 1 in 5 people, in 2026 would think that we'd be better off splitting into two countries, or letting states secede, right, if they didn't want to be part of the U.S., I think people would find that surprising. But given our current context, I think we take that as maybe a low number, right. And take some comfort in the fact that a lot of Americans seem like they still want this to work, right? They're not ready to give up yet.
So that's kind of an aspirational optimism. The optimism's aspirational. How do you sort of square? How if we disagree, I think one of the findings was, there's a disagreement about something as fundamental as whether the U.S. is living up to its founding ideals or not. I mean, that's right. So there's the aspiration is this, and then there's the sort of two views. One is that, we have, and we're doing quite good, and the other is we haven't done enough or good enough. How do we square that, or how do you look at your findings?
Yeah, I mean, what you find is that most Republicans are very excited going into this, right? Going into celebrating America's big 250. And most Democrats are much more sort of introspective and so we asked people what is the 250th anniversary of the signing Declaration of Independence mean to you? And 62%, given a bunch of different options, a huge group of Republicans, 62% say that they see it as a proud national milestone. Only 20% of Democrats say that. Democrats are more likely to say things like it's a chance to reflect on unfinished business, or it's not something I think about very much. And then obviously some, especially people of color, say it's a reminder of how people like me were once excluded, right? So very different views of how much we ought to be celebrating at the moment, as opposed to having more of a somber time for reflection on where the country is and whether we're headed in the right direction.
And Alex, it's sort of interesting. I think we all get why Democrats and Republicans are in those two places right now.
Mm-hmm.
We're independents, or people who kind of aren't strong partisans, and don't may not be in either one of those wings.
Yeah, the pure independents, right? So we include leaners, people who initially told us they were independents, but then say I lean in one direction or another. We include those as partisans because lots of research shows that they behave in really just as partisan ways as the other partisans. And so when you get down to the 10 or 15% of people who are independents, they're kind of all over the place, right? And you see a real mix. An interesting thing about that group is we found a decent number of them who tell us they're MAGA. Normally at polling places, just ask Republicans if they're MAGA.
Sure.
And we wanted to see if independents, and there's a sizable chunk of MAGA independents.
So I mean, the data suggests, obviously that Americans are divided, I guess it's along obviously political lines. But is it also identity, lived experience, like race, gender, religion? In other words, what actually defines that divide? Is it party, or is it that the lived experience of race, gender, religion, or a combination of both?
Yeah. One of the things that's really emerged in the current kind of affectively polarized, that's the way we describe it in political science, is that this polarization, yes, it has features of division along ideological and policy lines, right? But what it really has that we haven't seen in the past across party lines is this just real negative feelings about the other side, negative affect. And so in this affectively polarized era, one of the things we really have seen is that party has become so aligned with all of these other things you described, right? Race, religion, education level, and of course ideology, but even something, like how you think kids should be raised, right? Worldview. There's some great research, looking at that. So things that in the 90s didn't really, weren't predictive of whether you were a Democrat or a Republican. Now we all have sorted into the proper party. And I would argue that's kind of normal. Like, it was weird that we had this period in the last century where all those things didn't align with your partisanship. But what that's done is it's created this real superordinate identity. And getting back to your question, what it does is it makes a lot of stuff observationally equivalent, right? Like, is it party, or is it lived experience? Is it your religion? And the answer is it's kind of all of those things, because what party has become for a lot of people, right? A lot of people are still disengaged. I mean, one thing, right, people like, the two of us and people probably listening to this show, have to remember is that we're sort of freakish in terms of our attention to politics. Most people are not paying that much attention to politics, and rationally so. There's dozens of things, each day that they need to attend to that are going to have a bigger impact on the next day, and the next month than getting involved and accruing encyclopedic understanding of politics. But for the people who are engaged, and those are the people obviously you hear from the most and who are most participatory, it really has become this kind of us against them, sectarian kind of reality, and the alignment of it with all of these other things has made it incredibly hard to differentiate. So one of the things we saw, and you mentioned it when we were starting off, is just big differences in terms of how people view whether this is a Christian nation, whether the country should be and was founded as a Christian nation. Huge differences along party lines on that.
Right. So are those divides, like in those disagreements, over facts or over values? I mean, what's because when you look at sexism, racism, Christian nationalism, those, there's a pretty stark partisan divide, obviously, I think.
Right.
I think, but is it, again, because now we're polarized and lining properly in our, as you say, align with party, is it now, I'm in that party, therefore, I agree with these things, or is it because it kind of reflects my values, or is it beyond that?
Well, I think it's both. The causal arrow points in both directions, right? You become aligned with the party. Partly because like everyone in your milieu, everyone like you that is a Democrat or a Republican, right? And then all the sort of little pieces that come with being a Democrat or Republican, start to be part of your identity. And so it becomes harder for you to say things like, oh, well, I think we're wrong on this or that or the other thing, right? So you do see something of a shift of, this is one of the big questions is like, do people move to align with elites, or do they find the elites? Mostly people don't have strongly held views on things, most issues, like we debate so much in politics about like procedural things, whether the president can do something without Congress's approval or, all of those sorts of things. People don't have inherent sort of strongly held views usually on those things. The things where they do, are things, the easy issues, we call them, where people tend to sort of have a real sense of like, okay, this is going to affect me in a particular way, or like I know somebody who's gay, or I know somebody who's trans, or I know somebody who, uses recreational marijuana. And those are the types of issues where, sometimes it's from bottom up, but usually it's following the leader.
And is there any evidence that, as you in the data that we're all, one, either talking past each other or not talking to each other at all, and how that's impacting the polarization, this filtering into the two parties?
Yeah, I'll give you a great example of this. So immigration obviously has been a big issue. And one of the questions we put on this poll that I was really excited about is to get at the state of undocumented immigrants in our country and how people view it. And that's an issue where you really do see Republicans and Democrats talking past each other. So here's what we asked. And I don't think anyone else has done this before. I wanted to get a sense of how serious of a crime is it? How seriously do you view the transgression of being here without documentation, right? Being here illegally. So we just asked people, rate all of these crimes from not serious at all to very serious, right? And Republicans and Democrats agree almost perfectly on all of the crimes we asked about. So jaywalking, driving over the speed limit, drug trafficking, sexual assault, all these things. They agree almost perfectly. It's actually remarkable to get any two groups of people to agree that much on both the rank order, but actually like the precise number that was assigned to the seriousness of those crimes. The thing they disagreed on massively was how serious of a crime it is to be here illegally, right? So Democrats put it right around driving over the speed limit, right? Republicans put it up near drug trafficking as a crime, right? So way near the top, right? Or almost down at the bottom in terms of seriousness. And so if you think about that issue, I mean, how do you sort of come to agreement about this if you have just these vastly different views of how criminal that particular behavior is, right? The behavior that the thing that you're trying to address. That's one example. And obviously it emerges from things like years of people on the right hearing things about immigrants, and especially undocumented immigrants, that, cast them as disproportionately criminal, et cetera, right? And so that's one example. But yes, I mean, there are so many things. I mean, the going back to the whether this is a Christian nation, like 80% of Republicans almost tell us that the U.S. was founded as a Christian nation, right? That I don't know that that's exactly a fact. It's sort of an interpretation thing, but it's certainly an interpretation of something that's not just an opinion, right? That's not just pure opinion. So 80% of Republicans tell us that, and it's just around 1 in 5 Democrats who say the same thing, right? And independents are down closer in that rate. So you could see, I mean, that's just, if you think the nation was founded as a Christian nation, your views on all sorts of things are gonna be different.
Yeah, I mean, historically, I mean, the idea of two Americas, going back, I think maybe to John Edwards in the early 2000s, who talked a lot about the divide between two Americas, and it was mostly about economic inequality. But a lot of what I'm hearing from you in your poll sort of suggests that cultural and identity divides might be just as important as that economic divide. Has the nature of the divide sort of shifted? I don't know how long you've been looking at any of this, but have you noticed a shift from just economic divide to these other things, or has it always been there?
Well, no, there certainly has been a shift toward these social issues being really central, and of course, the identity part of it, right, is just much stronger. It's really us against them, and what that does is just it makes the stakes of everything so much higher, right? And I don't think, I mean, economic voting, like everything else, right, has decreased. There are a couple of sort of features of our modern polarization that work against each other in terms of changing the way we think about things. One is that polarization has made it so that most states, most congressional districts, most individuals are really not up for grabs, right? It's not the case that you see these massive swings like, Ronald Reagan in 1984, because the economy's going great, right at the end of the administration, just wins every place but, one state and the District of Columbia. And those are the two places Walter Mondale, said he owned property, right? He wins Minnesota and the District of Columbia. In 88, same sort of thing. I mean, those are just unimaginable kinds of swings, right? That would be caused by retrospective evaluation of the economy or anything else, right? It's just unimaginable. So on the one hand, the swings are tiny relative to the past, right? All of our elections have been pretty darn close to 50-50 since 2000. And so our country's very split. So that has made all of this stuff. Economic voting is not going to change as much. Scandal's not going to change as much. I mean, just all kinds of things just don't move as many voters. But at the same time, because we're split 50-50 and all these elections are close, a few 100,000 votes here or there, or in some districts much less than that, can swing an election. And so like the swings are smaller, but the margins are also smaller. And And so we end up sort of in the same place, even though obviously, like, yeah, I mean, a bad economy or a good economy are not moving as many people, and the alignments. If you look at the parties, yeah, it's finding the economic dimension is much harder than it used to be, right? Like, there are way more things that should economically connect, like core MAGA voters, right, with a lot of Democratic voters, lower income Democratic voters, and they don't anymore. You've lost the unions aren't there to do that quite as much, right? And so the alignment of the parties as these economic entities, as opposed to these, us against them kind of on social issue things, has changed dramatically.
So one of the things is, if you look ahead at to the 250th anniversary. Let me put it this way: I've thought for a long time part of this is caused by a real lack of any real sense of national purpose or common national goals. And so, given that, everything else has more impact and sort of starts the divide into, the two different corners. So as we look ahead to the 250th anniversary, it seems like they're moving. It's not moving towards a shared story about the country so much as possibly drifting into further competitive narratives about what America is and should be. I don't know if that's sort of, you would agree with that, but it just feels that, obviously there's things going on that may in the short term create a big, more independence moving, to Democrats or not, because of the economy, the war, and all those things. But it does seem like it's competing narratives, not a common story about the future or agreement about some shared story about the country.
Yeah, I think that's right. Right. And again, that Christian nationalism point, right? Like, just massive disagreement on that, right? Democrats are, saying that like a majority of Republicans tell us that the federal government should declare the U.S. a Christian nation, right? Like, less than 10% of Democrats think that. I mean, that is sort of a fundamental divide. There's a divide about the nature of how we should see race. There's a huge divide on the role of women. A lot of Republicans tell us things like, women complain too much, right? And overstate how much the problems they have at work and things like that. So there's a huge difference about our history. There's a huge difference about what we should be going forward. And we've really seen that, right? I mean, the two parties just present starkly different images of what the country ought to be. A lot of it on the right, obviously, is there's all this concern about the country becoming less white and shifting away. So we asked people. We did this experiment as a way to get at what people associate with being more or less American. And found some just fascinating things, including that like one of the groups that Republicans consistently think of as less American are Muslims, right? They don't particularly rate Christians more highly than Jews or other religions, but Muslims in particular. And then you have things like, if you're transgender or gay or bisexual, less American. Democrats don't have the one group that Democrats really think of as less American is Republicans. And that just shows you, I mean, there's a fundamental sort of sense of, if you're on that side, you are against this country. And Republicans are the same way, by the way. They rate Democrats as less American. In other polling we've done, Democrats and Republicans rate American leaders from the other party and partisans from the other party as more of a threat to this country than foreign adversaries, right? So absolutely. I mean, there's just so many disagreements that are at the core of what it means to be a Democrat or a Republican.
So there's a lot of ways both sides think they're the real America, which is
Absolutely.
again part of the problem.
Absolutely. I
Right?
mean,
Part of
we
the,
often hear people saying, well, that's just un-American, what you're doing. And we all mean American as like this great thing, right? It's a compliment to be American, and it's a diss to say something is un-American. And we do that all the time, right? Democrats will say that the things Trump is doing are un-American. And, there's certainly no doubt that Trump constantly will say that lots of things Democrats do are un-American or, hate are hateful of America. So, yeah, I mean, it's a divide that we've certainly had divides in the past. One of the things that's different about this divide, and we keep coming back to this, but when we were divided about the Vietnam War or about civil rights or about the role of women in society, or any number of issues that divided us viciously in the past, right? Including violence, all sorts of things. Those divides were not along party lines, right? Like that battle about the Vietnam War, right? I mean, that played out in the 1968 Democratic Convention, right, within the party, and it was playing out in the Republican Party too. And so these divides used to not be strictly across party lines, and now they're mostly across party lines. And that may seem like a kind of, small distinction, but it's not a small distinction, because what it does is it puts our democracy in the crosshairs, the functioning of our elections and the operation of our government and how we turn opinion into policy. That becomes the battlefield as opposed to the Democratic Convention, right? Or just the streets of our cities or something like that. What the battlefield now is really our democratic institutions, lowercase d, democratic institutions, and that is a real that puts a lot of strain on our system, and that's what we've seen is just some of the effects of that strain.
so curious because that period, post 68, going at Vietnam, going into a lot of this kind of almost a lot of the same, the hostage crisis with Iran taking the hostages, the Carter misery index, where inflation and everything was sky high, in the Vietnam War. There'd been a lot of division caused by that and was still sort of filtering through.
Right.
If you ran the same exact poll in 1976, or going into 80, that was the bicentennial, but would America look more unified or just divided in totally different ways? And also just in terms of, if you actually look at the massive shift that happened with Reagan, and it's sort of like closing the door on all that in a lot of ways, Morning in America, all that stuff. And Reagan wins by a, massive, as you pointed out, I worked for Mondale,
84,
we get wiped out in 84. Is it possible that, I mean, first of all, would the poll, do you think the results would have been different? I know there's no way for you to really answer that, but that huge, massive shift from that divide to a period where, there are a lot of Democrats who weren't happy with Reagan. I mean, just because, partisan activist Democrats, but for the most part, the country did get to Morning in America and believed that, and still. So is that kind of hopeful possible shift still something that you see as maybe a possibility? Is there any hopefulness that came out of the poll?
Well, certainly there's hopefulness in the sense that, like I said, most Americans have not given up on this. I actually was a little surprised by that. We asked a number of questions about, should states that want to leave be allowed to leave? Would we be better off if we split into Republican areas and Democratic areas? And really, that sort of rejected with resounding numbers. Now, you could say any percentage who say yes to that is potentially troubling, but the point is, that kind of rhetoric is not trickling down to the average person. And this is a survey, right, where they could engage in cheap talk. They could just say, yeah, no, we think we should split up, just to show how mad they are at Trump and at Republicans or at Democrats. And, and most Americans in our survey did not do that. Right. So I think that is encouraging. I'll say, looking back at that 76, I was born in 76. So I have that as that's a very important year for a lot of reasons in my mind. But there's no way you would see the kind of partisan divide then that you see now. And that is after arguably like a much more tumultuous time. Yeah. I mean, as you said, we had the Vietnam War. You didn't mention Watergate, right? We had Watergate. Yeah. A president was like impeached, would have been removed, resigned. Ford comes in, right? So you're in this stretch where Ford comes in, pardons him, and then Jimmy Carter sort of rides in on that. Just look at him, right? So evangelical Christian, Jimmy Carter, who's pitching himself in a way that you probably that you just wouldn't see today. That it's really a great example of just how many of those dimensions, how many of the things that we would talk about if we're talking about that race, just wouldn't be the divide today. And yes, there were people who were probably distraught, people who were negative about the country, but the partisan division was nothing like it is today. Now, I will say, so you ask for, is there what's sort of a hopeful note? I think those numbers are hopeful. I don't think those numbers are hopeful in terms of us returning anytime soon to a place where partisanship isn't something that divides us. And the reason I say that is because I think that period, for the middle part of the last century, through toward the 80s and 90s, when we start to see this real march toward polarization, I think that's the anomaly. We think of that, people my age and older think of that as kind of the norm, because that's just what we grew up with. In a two-party system, that's actually weird. I think the equilibrium path is that you do get people sorted into a party based on left or right. I mean, we have a system that is, unless we change things and have a multi-party democracy, we're going to have two parties, right? Unless we change mostly the single member winner take all district, right? We're going to have a two-party system, for the most part. Very hard for there to be multiple parties in our system. And when you have a two-party system, people should sort into the party that matches with their ideology, with their identities. And that's what we have right now. The challenge to me is not so much getting out of that, because I think the only way you get out of that, honestly, is a realignment of the parties. And maybe the racial changes in our country will force that, right? Force the Republican Party to be a party that is not mostly white. But until that realignment happens and kind of temporarily throws us off equilibrium, I think what the focus needs to be on is really just trying to make our institutions work in this context. Our institutions turns out not great to work under this kind of polarization. It puts a real strain on them. That's how our electoral institutions, but also our, just everything about our republic was not really designed to deal with this. And so that's the thing I'm hopeful for. One other thing you mentioned, you said, like an outside threat is something that might get us, having a common purpose. You didn't say threat, you said a common purpose. Often a common purpose comes from something negative, like an outside threat. I'm not as confident anymore. I'm old enough to remember when people were telling me that, oh, well, COVID is that's going to make us set aside our partisan differences. And it went completely the other way. That's not to say other such things, other such, things won't do that. But I think what's more likely to change it is either we get our institutions in order and really have the system work, or the parties have to realign because of just the demographic makeup of the country.
Well, thanks, Alex. We're running out of time, but before, unfortunately, I didn't get to talk Greek politics with you, but we'll maybe bring you back and do that on another day. But I wanted to give you an opportunity to tell people where they could find the poll, where they can catch what when you put something out. If you can let people know where to learn more.
Yeah, if you just search for UMass poll. We've got a website. We've got all our releases on there, lots of crosstabs, lots of ways to get, sort of direct access to manipulating the data yourself. We view ourselves as a resource for that. And then, of course, I'm pretty easy to find on social media and things like that.
Cool. And we'll put that all in the show notes so that people can find it in the show notes on the podcast. Thanks, Alex, for coming on, and thanks everyone for listening to or watching That Trippi Show. We'll link to the UMass Amherst poll we just talked about in our show notes. Make sure to join us at sez.us, a civil social network for people, not bots or algorithms. This podcast will always be free and part of Lincoln Square, so check out the latest at lincolnsquare.media. Also, if you're listening to this episode on YouTube, please like and subscribe to get alerts when we post the next episode. And next week, the other Alex will be back. Thanks, Alex, for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Joe. It's a treat.